What is the secret backstory of every Knight of Apocalypse, and what is the origin of their insane powers? In this video, I will explain it all, including the secret information that is only revealed in the bonus materials and in the later chapters of the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse manga. The twist about Percival's true origins is so freaking crazy, and I was shocked by all that stuff about Gawain. So let's get into it. You guys know how this works. If you enjoy my 7 Deadly Sins and 4 Knights of the Apocalypse content, leave a quick like and comment right now for that YouTube algorithm. And of course, if you don't want to miss future uploads, and there's gonna be a lot of them, definitely subscribe and hit that notification bell. Let's start it off with the son of Meliodas and Elizabeth and the prince of the kingdom of Leonis, Tristan. Now, both Tristan and Lancelot are first seen in chapter 345 of the original 7 Deadly Sins manga, but at that time they are both just bumps in the bellies of their mothers. Tristan's true official introduction is in the final chapter of the original 7 Deadly Sins manga, chapter 346. At that time, he is 10 years old, and we see that he is a friendly and energetic kid with one blue eye and one green eye. He also has long white hair like Elizabeth, but the shape of his hair at the top looks more like Meliodas' hairstyle. Tristan's appearance is clearly a combination of both Elizabeth's and Meliodas' features, and this doesn't just stop at physical traits, but it also extends to his powers and magical abilities, but more on that later. In the final chapter of the original manga, we see a 10-year-old Tristan running around the capital Leonis and telling the other kids that he has uncovered a secret plot to take over the country. The people Tristan approaches seem very skeptical, which implies that Tristan has a wild imagination and is probably known for doing these types of shenanigans. This probably isn't his first rodeo. But Tristan maintains that he is serious. He heard a rumor from one of the castle maids that the legendary traitors, the 7 Deadly Sins, will be secretly gathering in the castle in order to take over Leonis. Tristan says that as the royal prince and as an aspiring holy knight, he has a duty to stop the traitors and protect the kingdom. But again, no one really takes Tristan seriously, so he decides that he will have to stop the 7 Deadly Sins on his own. However, Tristan's ambitious plan to stop the 7 Deadly Sins is interrupted when his mom Elizabeth grabs him, and the next thing he knows, the 7 Deadly Sins themselves are there greeting him. Well, some of the sins are, including Bond, King, Diane, Gother, and of course Tristan's father, Meliodas. These are all the sins that will also play an important role in the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse. Merlin is notably absent, and Escanor, aka Big Daddy Sunshine, is sadly no longer with us. Or is he? Stay tuned. Diane pets Tristan's head and tells him how cute he is, and King agrees, although he says that he's not as cute as their kid. Gother says that Tristan has a really impressive combat class for his age, but Tristan is not buying all this friendly chit-chat. He accuses the Sins of being wanted criminals and traitors who want to overthrow the kingdom, and he vows to stop them. Meliodas says that now that Tristan has figured out their secret plan, they can't let him live. And Tristan freaks out at the revelation that his own father is also a traitor and a villain. It turns out that Meliodas was just messing with his son by letting him think the false rumors about the 7 Deadly Sins from the past were actually true, which is exactly what you'd expect from an unhinged joker like Meliodas. He messes with his own wife and everyone else around him all the time, so it only makes sense that he would also mess with his own son. Tristan rushes at Meliodas and attempts to fight him, claiming that he is going to be a holy knight and holy knights have a duty to protect the kingdom from villains. Obviously, Tristan can't do anything to Meliodas, but his energy and determination is pretty amusing to watch, and all the Sins are impressed by his tenacity. Elizabeth then proceeds to calm her son down, and she invites him and the Sins to walk outside to the balcony of the castle. Suddenly, fireworks erupt in the sky, and it is revealed that the real reason why the Sins have gathered at the castle is not a secret plan to take over the kingdom, but instead they all came together to celebrate Tristan's 10th birthday. A large crowd of the kingdom's subjects has also gathered, and they are all excited to wish the young prince a happy birthday. The crowd also acknowledges the 7 Deadly Sins as the legendary heroes and saviors, not as traitors or villains. It seems that Tristan was so consumed by his quest to stop the 7 Deadly Sins from taking over the kingdom that he forgot his own birthday, and even after the truth is revealed, Tristan is still kind of skeptical about Meliodas and the Sins. But Bond draws Tristan's attention to the people of the kingdom, who have gathered in massive numbers to celebrate Meliodas and the 7 Deadly Sins, along with Prince Tristan. If Meliodas was really a villain, why would so many people show him such respect and reverence? Tristan continues to be somewhat skeptical about his father's true intentions, especially since Meliodas is so short and irresponsible and he touches his mother's boobs every day. I mean, that is real. That is so real. Gother then decides to give Tristan a special gift, and that gift turns out to be the entire story of the 7 Deadly Sins straight up downloaded right into his brain. I'm not like super sure if just revealing all of that info to a 10-year-old at once is the best idea, but it saves us, the readers, from a long flashback and info dump, and Tristan eventually sheds a tear after learning everything about his father and his comrades, and the heroic 7 deadly sins. Later on, we see Meliodas and Tristan somewhere out in the wilderness. Meliodas is training Tristan in the arts of swordsmanship and combat, and Meliodas says that he can't believe that Tristan would actually think that his father is a villain. Tristan says that, hey, he didn't do anything wrong, it was Meliodas' fault for messing with him, and again, Tristan is right. He's just being a responsible prince who feels an obligation to protect his kingdom, and his father is the one clearly messing with him. Tristan is obviously adventurous and has a wild imagination, so Meliodas knew exactly what he was doing when he was messing with Tristan and misleading him about the 7 deadly sins and their true intentions. As father and son are called by Elizabeth to have lunch, Meliodas tells Tristan that his future is ever expanding, like that sky. Tristan wonders whether he must become the king or a holy knight, and Meliodas says that this is something that Tristan will have to decide. And then, in a pretty epic moment, as Meliodas and Tristan are walking hand in hand and gazing into the vast endless sky, Tristan says that he wants to become one of the 7 deadly sins. Now, at some point around this time, Tristan met Bon and Elaine's son Lancelot, and the two of them engaged in some friendly sparring. But at one point, Tristan awakened the demonic side of his power and he lost control. He ended up injuring Lancelot and leaving a permanent scar on the boy's forehead. This instance of losing control in battle had a deep impact on Tristan, and after that he nearly stopped wanting to be a holy knight altogether. At the start of the Grudge of Edinburgh movie, we see that Tristan is no longer dedicating himself to combat training, and he is no longer wishing to be a holy knight. He has become more interested in learning other things instead, such as the art of herbology from Hendrickson. Meliodas tries to push back on Tristan's neglect of combat training, but Tristan argues that he no longer wants to be the things he wanted to be as a child. This implies that after losing control of his power and injuring Lancelot, Tristan no longer wants to fight and be a holy knight, and he would rather dedicate his life to more peaceful pursuits. However, during the events of the Grudge of Edinburgh movie, Tristan is forced to fight alongside Lancelot and others in order to protect the ones he loves, including his mother, Elizabeth. Tristan progressively softens his stance on fighting after Lancelot explains that he was never mad at Tristan for injuring him and giving him a scar. Just the opposite, Lancelot was mad because Tristan refused to fight him again after that because he didn't want to hurt him, and Lancelot was insulted by this because it implied that Lancelot was weak and couldn't hold his own against Tristan. During the climax of the movie, Tristan is even pushed to use his demonic powers again to defeat Death Peers. But even though Lancelot manages to get through to Tristan during the events of the Grudge of Edinburgh movie, Tristan would continue to rely heavily on the goddess side of his powers while refusing to use the demon side unless absolutely necessary. As we know, the demon side is more unstable and much harder to control. So even when we meet Tristan in the sequel manga at the age of 16, he is still hesitant to use his demon powers and he relies heavily on goddess powers instead. Tristan is introduced in chapter 54 of the sequel manga. According to the prophecy, Tristan is the Knight of Pestilence, and he is described as a boy who has both holiness and evil in his eyes, which is a reference to the fact that he is the son of a demon and a goddess. He is of course the Prince of Leones, and he has an entire order of holy knights under his command, a group of knights known as the Tristan Platoon. Prince Tristan is generally cool-headed and benevolent, and he is well loved by the people and by his subordinates. Next, let's talk about Lancelot, who is officially introduced in a bonus chapter of the original manga, chapter 346.5. The bonus chapter takes place sometime after the events of chapter 346, but before the events of the Grudge of Edinburgh. It begins inside the kingdom of Benwick, where a human king and a fairy queen rule. The couple have a son, the young prince Lancelot, and when we first see Lancelot, he looks a lot like a girl. In fact, the human who enters the forest to sell human artifacts to the fairies mistakes Lancelot for a girl. This human merchant is actually a grifter. He is selling extremely common human items such as a mug, a pot, and a ladle, but he is telling the fairies that these are rare, ancient human artifacts. Since the fairies don't know much about the human world, they are easily tricked by the human. The fairies are willing to trade much rarer and much more valuable fairy items for these completely worthless human trinkets, and it's going pretty well for the merchant until he spots Lancelot. The merchant promises to give Lancelot an exceptionally rare human item if he agrees to meet with him after everyone else has left. The innocent-looking Lancelot smiles and agrees. The merchant's plan is actually to capture Lancelot and sell him to some rich pervs at a high price. Clearly, this human is an absolute piece of filth, and he reminds me of the people who tried to do a similar thing to a young Bon all those years ago. Those of you who remember Bon's backstory know exactly what I mean. Nevertheless, as the merchant attempts to capture Lancelot, he immediately regrets his decision. Lancelot just punches him in the gut and threatens to kill him if he ever comes back, before kicking him in the face and sending him flying. It is only after absolutely whooping him that Lancelot tells the merchant that he is not a girl. Lancelot then returns all of the items that the fairies traded to the human back to their original owners, and this whole little event tells us quite a few interesting things about Lancelot's character. Clearly he is sharper than the average fairy, because unlike the other fairies, he was not tricked by the human's lies. Lancelot is also extremely strong. He is not just some average 10-year-old kid. Finally, we see that Lancelot has a strong sense of justice. As the son of the king and queen, he didn't have to involve himself with this merchant and his scheme. And yet, Lancelot felt that it was his duty to put a stop to the merchant's scheme and to return all the items to their original owners. He feels that it is his responsibility to correct the wrongs committed by this human merchant, especially since the trickery took place on the territory that is ruled over by his father. The other fairies comment that Lancelot has changed a lot since going to visit Leonis, and instead of letting Ban, Elaine, or Jericho patrol the forest and deal with lawbreakers, the young Lancelot has taken it upon himself to carry out those duties despite his young age. In fact, Lancelot appears to be a very serious and responsible young man. He thinks that just playing around or going on adventures is a useless waste of time, and he considers patrolling the forest and punishing evildoers to be far more important and useful. Lancelot even confronts his father Ban and tells him that he should be more proactive as a king. He should be going around preventing humans like that merchant from tricking the fairies and perpetuating their schemes on their territory. Lancelot grills Ban about needing to be more aware and responsible as king, but Ban is just like, sorry. Then Lancelot says, okay, it's fine as long as you understand, and Ban says, as expected of my son. And then he proceeds to thank Lancelot for all the help that he's been given to the king. As Lancelot leaves, Ban asks Elaine if she thinks that Lancelot has been more difficult lately, and Elaine just says that he's at that age now, so it makes sense. At this point, we also learn that Jericho is Lancelot's master, and she is the one training him. Man, talking about this chapter definitely brings back some memories. At this point, I still really like Jericho as a character, since this was before her character was completely assassinated by Nakaba Suzuki in the sequel manga. As I always say here on the channel, let's never talk about what they did to Jericho's character ever again, because just, man. Anyway, at this point, Lancelot already has that scar on his forehead that he got from Tristan, but the scar is kept hidden by Lancelot's long hair, which is what makes him look like a girl. We also learned that Lancelot inherited the ability to read the hearts of other people from his mother, Elaine. This means that he knows what people are thinking or feeling on the inside, even if they never actually told him. The chapter then jumps back to that human merchant who is trying to escape the forest after getting that beating from Lancelot. However, as the merchant attempts to run away, he suddenly vanishes into thin air. It is clear that he has literally disappeared as a result of some unknown magic force, although at first we have no idea what kind of force it is. Meanwhile, back inside the forest, Lancelot decides to cut his hair and change his clothes so that he stops being mistaken for a girl. Elaine likes Lancelot's new look, and once Ban returns from one of his patrols, he decides to unwind with some delicious Aberdeen ale. Lancelot wants to try some Aberdeen ale too, so Ban, like every top-tier family father, is just like, sure, 10-year-old son, have some alcohol. For a moment, Lancelot is able to hear the voice of Zhivago in Ban's heart, and we see a few heartwarming sketches of Ban and Zhivago. Lancelot then gets the silly idea that he can grow up quicker if he drinks more of the ale, and he ends up downing the entire mug. Ban is like, I said one sip, you stupid kid, and both Ban and Elaine are concerned about Lancelot since he just drank so much ale. But Lancelot says he's fine, the drink was just bitter, and he totally feels like an adult now. I guess Lancelot really is a lot like his father Ban, especially when it comes to his personality. He's stubborn, impulsive, brave, and he likes to drink booze. Right after that, Ban is informed by some of the other fairies that they might have a problem. The merchant who had been in the forest earlier vanished into thin air. The place where the merchant disappeared doesn't have any secret underground caves or anything like that, and what's more, there has been a rumor going around in Britannia that humans have been randomly disappearing. According to the rumors, the victims are always human, and in cases where members of other races were present, those individuals were always left behind and only the humans disappeared. This rumor has been so persistent that even Meliodas is concerned about it, and so Ban decides that they will have to investigate the situation first thing in the morning. Lancelot immediately asks Ban to let him help out on this mission, and he promises to be useful, but Ban refuses and tells Lancelot to go back to the castle. Ban looks pretty stern and serious in this moment, and it is clear that he is concerned about this disappearing phenomenon, and he definitely doesn't want his son to get mixed up in it. Once they return to the castle that night, Bond expresses concern to Elaine about Lancelot changing recently. Ever since he went to Leonis, Lancelot has been trying to act more like an adult, and he's been a lot more serious and responsible. Bond thinks that Lancelot might have changed because once he got hit in the head by Tristan, his ability to read the hearts of other people manifested. And so Bond is worried that this new power might have changed Lancelot, but Elaine assures him that she has that very same power, so Lancelot was bound to unlock it at some point anyway. The ability to read hearts alone is not enough to change someone's personality, and in fact, Elaine tells Bond that he is the real reason why Lancelot has changed. Bond is confused at first, but Elaine explains that when Lancelot went to Leonis, he realized what a respected person his father was, what a heroic warrior he was, and how legendary the exploits of the 7 deadly sins truly were. On top of that, just like he did with Tristan, Gowther used his powers to show Lancelot the story of his father Bond and his father's history with the 7 deadly sins. This is what inspired Lancelot to change. He wants to become a great warrior like Bond, and he wants to be recognized and respected by his father. That is why Lancelot is suddenly so interested in being serious and acting like a grown-up. He doesn't want to be just a little kid anymore who goes around playing games. He wants to be a powerful ruler and a great warrior like Bond. He wants to live up to the legend of his father. Thanks to Elaine, Bond finally understands what's going on with Lancelot, and as Lancelot sleeps in his bed that night, Bond tucks him in and tells him that he doesn't need to rush to become an adult. When he wakes up the next day, Lancelot ventures out on his own and he is carrying his makeshift spear. On his walk, Lancelot encounters Jericho, and in that very moment, Bond snaps awake. In his dream, Bond saw himself back in his childhood, just as he had decided to rush in to rob a mansion without waiting for Zhivago, despite the fact that Bond was specifically instructed to wait. This moment led to Bond being captured and beaten by the owners of the mansion, and he lost contact with Zhivago after that, at least for a long while. Bond goes to look for Lancelot, but he realizes that Lancelot is gone. Lancelot has disobeyed his father's orders, and he has decided to investigate the disappearing humans phenomenon on his own. Thankfully, Jericho had a feeling that Lancelot would go out alone, so she decided to accompany him. Lancelot is committed to solving this mystery on his own, since he wants to show his father that he can do it. Lancelot wants Bond to take him seriously and to stop treating him like a child, and Lancelot believes that solving this mystery is the perfect opportunity to earn his father's respect. As it begins to rain, Lancelot and Jericho suddenly see a spot where the rain appears to split. It is as if everything is being rained on except a single spot which is about the size of a large doorway. At first, Lancelot and Jericho think that it might be an illusion, but Lancelot then remembers that it had also rained back when the human merchant disappeared. Suddenly, Lancelot and Jericho hear a voice. The voice says, "Quick, come here." Jericho wants to retreat and tell Bond about this, but the stubborn and reckless Lancelot decides that he will rush in alone. Jericho can't let this happen, so instead of going back to get Bond, she grabs Lancelot's hand and the two of them walk inside the mysterious doorway together. As they do, they both appear to vanish into thin air. We then see Bond rushing through the forest in an attempt to find Lancelot, but as we know, it is already too late. By the time Bond arrives to the spot where the doorway had been, Lancelot and Jericho are gone, and so is the rain. This means that the doorway itself is also gone, and Bond will not be able to follow Lancelot. After these events, Lancelot was missing for 3 whole years until he suddenly returned much stronger than he was before. Prior to his disappearance, he and Tristan were about evenly matched in battle, and Tristan even managed to get the better of him at times, as we know. But when he returned after 3 years, Lancelot was in an entirely different league, and he had become much stronger than he was before, though we're not exactly sure how. At some point after his return, Lancelot disguised himself as a fat fairy with Yu-Gi-Oh hair in order to infiltrate Edinburgh and see what was going on there. But Tristan unexpectedly showed up and saved Lancelot and the other fairies and giants from the empty. This led Lancelot and Tristan to fighting side by side and clearing the air about the previous fight they had when Tristan lost control and injured Lancelot, and then felt really bad about it for years. Thanks to Lancelot, Tristan finally starts coming out of his shell once again, and then when Deathpierce is defeated, Lancelot just takes off without saying goodbye. We see him again about 3 years later at the age of 16 in the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse manga. As a fairy-human hybrid, he possesses the ability to shapeshift and disguise himself, and when we initially meet him early on in the manga, he appears in the form of a talking fox named Sin. He is only confirmed to be Lancelot, one of the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse, in chapter 47 of the manga. According to the prophecy, he is the Knight of War, and due to his shape-shifting ability, the prophecy describes him as a mysterious boy with no fixed appearance. By the time we meet him in the sequel, Lancelot is already in the service of Meliodas, the King of Leones. Lancelot is basically a spy who has been ordered by Meliodas to find all 4 Knights of the Prophecy and bring them all to Leones. Despite being an incredibly strong warrior, most residents of Britannia have never heard of Lancelot. That is because he doesn't allow his opponents to survive long enough to spread rumors about him. Lancelot is a spy, a secret agent, and a fierce warrior, and he doesn't allow his enemies to live long enough to publicly reveal his identity and the true nature of his power. Now let's talk about Percival, the main protagonist of the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse, and a character who is not introduced in the original manga like Tristan and Lancelot. The prophecy describes Percival as the Knight of Death, a boy with verdant, wing-like hair. Percival is 16 years old at the start of the sequel manga, the same age as Tristan and Lancelot. He spent almost all his life on top of a gigantic pillar-shaped mountain called God's Finger. He lived there with his grandpa, and there was no one else up there with them. They were essentially completely isolated from the outside world, and yes, that was done on purpose. His grandpa was intentionally hiding Percival from the outside world, and we will talk about why a little later. Now, God's Finger is definitely an interesting place to grow up. It is so tall that its tip is located above the clouds, and from the top of God's Finger you can actually see the shadow of the Sky Island, which is the home of the Celestials from the Prisoners of the Sky movie. At first we are told that Percival's father is a holy knight of Camelot named Ironside, a man who betrayed King Arthur along with Percival's grandfather. Ironside disappeared while the grandpa took Percival to God's Finger and raised him there alone. Percival's grandpa would then go on to train Percival from the age of 3 in order to turn him into an extremely powerful fighter. Percival's calm and peaceful existence is shattered when his grandfather is suddenly murdered at the hands of a knight in red armor who showed up to God's Finger in a flying boat. The Red Knight fatally wounded the grandpa and left Percival for dead. But miraculously, Percival managed to survive, and as his grandpa is dying, he tells Percival that the Red Knight is actually Ironside, Percival's father. After this tragic turn of events, Percival is determined to find Ironside and punish him for what he did to his grandpa. He also wants answers from his father about the true circumstances of his birth and about the real reason why Ironside killed his grandpa and tried to kill Percival as well. Now, his grandpa's claim that Ironside is Percival's father is only kind of true, but more on that later. Since he grew up in isolation, Percival is extremely curious about the outside world, and since he has no experience socializing with people other than his grandpa, he is initially very trusting and naive. At certain times, this gets Percival into serious trouble, but this pure and innocent outlook on life also leads him to making some important friends and allies. Our first hint that Percival is something more than just an ordinary human is his extremely unique magic, which is called Hope. Hope is a type of magic that is powered by the hope of the user's allies, and by the faith that the user's allies place in him. Hope is a very rare type of magic that is classified as hero-type magic, and this type of magic only manifests in an incredibly small amount of people. Hope allows Percival to generate a magical aura around his body or parts of his body, and he can then use that aura and manipulate it in many different ways. In addition to his unbelievably rare and powerful magic, Percival was always far stronger and far more resilient to damage than an ordinary human. There was always something different about Percival, something special and almost superhuman, and that led to a lot of speculation about Percival's true race and identity. He has enhanced resistance against drugs and other types of potions, he has built-in resistance to the miasma of the demon realm, and he has above average lung capacity, due in part to the fact that he grew up so high on God's Finger. And although at first you might be tempted to think that Percival's extraordinary strength came from the intense physical training that he received from his grandpa since he was like 3 years old, that is only a small part of the story. We eventually learned that Percival even has the ability to speak the language of the Demon Clan, although even he doesn't know why he knows this language. His knowledge of the demon tongue on top of his resistance to the miasma of the demon realm led a lot of people to speculate that Percival might actually be some sort of demon. But the truth is even crazier than that, because Percival turns out to be something else entirely, a completely different being from anything we've seen so far. Percival is none other than a life spirit inside a human body. Earlier I told you that Ironside was kind of Percival's father, but not really. Well, Percival was born as the 7th prince of some unknown kingdom, but he died as a baby when a wagon he was traveling in fell off a cliff. Ironside found the body of the child and he took it to Camelot. He then used forbidden magic to turn the body into a vessel for a powerful life spirit. A life spirit is a being of pure energy with no shape or personality, and these life spirits are what make all life possible, including the lives of all the races of the world. Life spirits are said to be pieces of the Great One, so I guess we could think of them as pieces of God. Under normal circumstances, a life spirit has no personality or individuality, so Ironside wanted to use a life spirit to bring the deceased child back to life and give it what is essentially an immortal body. A human body imbued with a life spirit will be virtually indestructible, and that is exactly what Ironside wanted, because his own biological son Diodora was sick and dying. Ironside expected that Percival's body infused with a life spirit would be just an empty vessel, and he could then transfer Diodora's soul into Percival's body. But things didn't go according to plan. After Percival's body was revived by the life spirit, Percival somehow gained self-awareness and individuality. It might be because his grandpa showed him love and refused to allow him to become a vessel for someone else, or it might have been a combination of several factors, but at the end of the day, Ironside's plan backfired. The vessel he created for his son became a completely different person, the person we know today as Percival, a life spirit who inhabits a human body. The grandpa took Percival and escaped with him in order to protect him and prevent him from becoming a vessel for Ironside's real son. And this is why Percival was kept hidden on top of God's finger for so long. The grandpa, who obviously isn't his biological grandpa, didn't want Percival's own unique personality to be forcibly erased by Ironside in order to make room for Diodora. After betraying Ironside and Camelot, Percival's grandpa took Percival to Lyonesse and met with Meliodas. Meliodas treated the injuries that the grandpa sustained during his escape from Camelot, and he offered to help him raise Percival. But the grandpa felt that raising Percival was his personal responsibility, and so he hid the boy away on God's finger and raised him up there in complete isolation. Before the grandpa left Lyonesse, Meliodas gifted him the Ouroboros medallion as a sign of friendship. But wait, okay, so now we know why Percival is so strong and resistant to damage, but we still haven't answered the question of why he is able to speak the language of the demons. Well, when Percival was about 1 year old, he stumbled upon an entrance to the demon realm somewhere in a cave on God's finger. He ended up getting lost inside the demon realm, but he was found and adopted by Zeldris and Gelda. At one point, his hope magic saved a bunch of demons from a giant beast called Behemoth, and he came to be revered as a savior among the demon clan. During this time, he learned to speak the language of the demons, and even though he forgot much about his time in the demon realm since he was so young when he was there, he never lost the ability to speak the language. And now, finally, let's talk about Gawain, the last knight of the apocalypse and the one whose backstory is currently the most mysterious out of all the 4 knights. According to the prophecy, Gawain is the Knight of Famine, and she is described as a person who possesses gold-colored magic. This gold-colored magic is referred to as Dawn, but it appears to be the very same power that we know as Sunshine, a divine grace that was originally possessed by Mael and then inherited by Escanor. Gawain somehow inherited this power after the tragic death of Escanor, and she openly calls herself the Master of the Sun. She also uses a weapon called Sacred Sword Rita, which is a direct reference to Escanor's divine axe Rita. Gawain is the niece of King Arthur Pendragon because she was adopted by Kay Pendragon, but Kay and Arthur are not actually related by blood. So even though Gawain is considered Arthur's niece, as far as we know she's not an actual blood relative of Arthur Pendragon. As I said, Gawain's backstory is still a mystery to us because it is also a mystery to her herself. She doesn't seem to know anything about her origins or how she got her incredible power. She just knows that she was raised in Camelot by Kay and by 2 magic puppets that she calls Grandma and Grandpa and who taught her everything she knows about magic. Just like Escanor when we first meet him in his daytime form, Gawain is extremely egotistical and full of herself. She refuses to listen to orders from anyone because she believes herself to be the strongest, and so she believes herself to be the only one worthy of giving orders. She also sees herself as superior to all the other Knights of Prophecy. Initially, she is quite immature in general, but she does mature a bit as the story goes on. On top of Sunshine, Gawain also has other overpowered magical abilities. She is able to use strong spells like Absolute Cancel to cancel out a perfect cube, and she can also use advanced teleportation magic to instantly teleport from one spot to another. This implies a potential connection between Gawain and Merlin, which is really interesting, since there's clearly already some connection between her and Escanor. Gawain's clothing very obviously suggests a connection between her and both Merlin and Escanor. She wears a top that is extremely similar to Merlin's, while her belt and pants could easily have belonged to Escanor. As noted earlier, Gawain is the Knight of Famine, and the silhouette that we get of the Knight of Famine in the prophecy could easily be a silhouette of Escanor. So the hints are clearly there, but what exactly do these hints point to is the real mystery. Could Gawain be some sort of reincarnation of Escanor created by Merlin after his death, or maybe even the daughter of Merlin and Escanor? Maybe a biological daughter, if some stuff happened behind the scenes that we didn't know about, or maybe she is an artificial magical creation of Merlin's. Like maybe Merlin missed Escanor too much and regretted never giving him a chance romantically, so she decided to magically create a child that has the biology and magical ability of Escanor and Merlin. But if that is the case, then why isn't Merlin around right now? Why would she create a child only to abandon her to be raised by Kay Pendragon and magical puppets? What do you guys think? What are Gawain's secret origins and what is her connection to Merlin and Escanor? Let me know down in the comments below. If you're looking for another epic 7 Deadly Sins video to watch next, check out our full breakdown of Bond and Elaine's backstory and the full story of their relationship, link on screen and in the description. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more, leave a quick like to let me know. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications if you want to be notified next time we drop another banger 7 Deadly Sins and 4 Nights of the Apocalypse video.